Hello and welcome everyone tonight to our final Books and Brews of this season. My name is Katharine Froehlich and I'm your host for the evening. And I can say that I really miss seeing everyone's faces and especially miss closing with Pale Fire Brewery beer. So I look forward to hopefully shifting this model and combining some of this for our next season when we start back up in the fall. But for now, we're going to show our gratitude and thank our behind the scenes team from WMRA, Matt Bengay, Martin Mayani, and Chris Boros. And we also want to thank our Books and Brews sponsor, the Gaines Group Architects. They are a community-focused architectural firm with offices in Harrisonburg and Charlottesville. And you can find out more about what they do and possibly your next architectural project at thegainesgroup.com. We will also have tonight's book, When the Center Does Not Hold, Leading in an Age of Polarization, available from Stone Soup Books, and that information is at stonesoupbooks.net. Signed copies are available for pickup in Waynesboro or to be shipped wherever there are readers. And I also want to just say again, thank you for being here this evening, for being a part of the conversation and really crafting this conversation about what you want to talk about. This is an issue, I think, that has affected all of us. And as we come off talking about monuments and we talked about all of these types of things, we're encountering conflict, polarization everywhere in our world. So without saying much further, I want to welcome our author this evening and our chapter authors. Our lead author is David Brubaker, and he serves as the Dean of School of Social Sciences and Professions and also as the Professor of Organizational Studies at Eastern Mennonite University. He has 34 years of experience in workplace mediation and in organizational and congregational consulting. David has consulted and trained with organizations throughout the United States and internationally in Northern Ireland, Mozambique, Angola, to name just a few. He is the author of numerous articles and also another book, Promise and Peril, Understanding and Managing Change and Conflict in Congregations, and co-author of the Little Book of Healthy Organizations. David earned a BS in Business Administration from Messiah College, an MBA from Eastern University, and a PhD from the University of Arizona, specializing in religion and organization. Thank you for joining us tonight, David.
Thanks, Katharine.
I also want to introduce our chapter authors tonight who joined David in writing this book. Teresa Haas has been an educator and counselor for over 20 years. In addition to being a licensed as a professional counselor and an approved clinical supervisor, she holds a doctorate in counseling from George Washington University. Teresa has served in various leadership roles in academic and organizational settings, and currently she serves as the director of the Center for Grief and Healing at Hospice of the Piedmont in Charlottesville. Thank you, Teresa, for joining us this evening.
Thank you, MK.
Everett Brubaker, who's joining us at the top there, is joining us on vacation from San Antonio, Texas. So great thanks for joining us while on vacation. He has been active in bridge building efforts related to environmental and social issues for nearly a decade. He holds a BA in environmental sustainability from Eastern Mennonite University and an MA in communication and advocacy from James Madison University. And Everett was a recipient of the Civic Engagement Award from the Graduate School at JMU in 2019. He currently works for Harrisonburg Redevelopment and Housing Authority, overseeing organizational communications and collaborating with lower income families to increase their self-sufficiency. He is also teaching speech and communication at Eastern Mennonite University. So thank you, Everett, for joining us as well.
Great to be here. Thanks, MK.
Great. Well, David, it's a small book, which is perfect for summer, but it packs a lot of punch. I just wanted to ask, it's got a great title, and of course you quoted Yeats in that. What was your primary objective or hope in writing this book?
Yeah, so I really had three objectives in writing the book. And the first was I wanted personally to understand what causes polarization, because we've seen it happen at multiple times in our own history, and we've seen it happen around the world. So I wanted to understand the drivers of polarization. Why does this happen? And secondly, I've worked with a number of leaders in polarized systems, because it's not just the country that can polarize, any social system can polarize. So I've worked with pastors, priests, rabbis, and organizational leaders, for-profit, nonprofit, who were in polarized systems, and I developed a real compassion for them, wanted to understand what's it like to lead in this kind of a system, and how can one lead effectively. And third, I think for the sake of my children and grandchildren, I really wanted to make a modest contribution towards depolarizing the country, because we can't continue to live this way with each other. It's not healthy, it's not life-giving. And so to come out of this current phase of polarization was really important to me.
Yeah. I know after reading it, I keep recommending everywhere I go, and it's not just leaders. It's just being. It's just kind of coexisting, driving down the road and seeing a sign. Now, what was it like to collaborate for you all as far as authors putting this together and choosing certain chapters? And what was that process? How did that come about?
Well, I'll begin by saying there were some areas in which I felt I had enough background to write effectively, and some areas in which I didn't. And particularly that applied to communication and trauma and resilience. And those were the reasons I invited Everett, Teresa, and Carolyn Yoder, another chapter author who can't be with us tonight, to contribute. So I'd welcome them to speak to their contributions.
Oh, well, I was really honored to participate and to think about just what does create and facilitate resilience. I think it was a fun process. It felt fast, but also when I think about just where we are and as you said, MK, what a powerful punch this packs. It feels I feel very humbled and honored to be part of it. So very appreciative.
I would echo that as well. There's some scary questions your father can ask you. Would you write a chapter in a book was up there for me. But I was finishing up graduate school in communication studies, and working on some efforts in the community around community organizing and environmental efforts, and doing research on conservative groups who are working at depolarization around climate change. So it landed and came at a good time to really pull a lot of those things together. So it was great to be a part of.
Yeah. Well, I just want to, I was remiss in reminding everyone that you can use the Q&A. We'll be kind of talking about some things, but we're certainly, this is a conversation that you help craft. So please feel free anytime to put your questions in the Q&A or in the chat if you're watching us on Facebook, and we will get to those questions in a little bit. David, you talk about polarization in terms of certain levels or stages, and you wrote the book in 2000. It was published in 2019. So could you talk to us a little bit about what you found we were at in this country, in the United States, at a polarization stage, and whether that's changed with the pandemic, whether we've gone up or down on that scale?
Yeah, so I would give credit to Speed Lease, a very experienced organizational consultant who had worked with hundreds of cases, and he developed 5 levels of conflict to basically assess or analyze where a given organization might be at. At level 4, which he called fight flight, people have started to pull away from each other and believe that they are good and the other group is bad, and they would like to drive the other group out of the organization. At level 5, both of these groups have concluded that the other group is evil and needs to be erased from the face of the earth. And we see some of this kind of level of conflicts in certain parts of the world. Israel-Palestine has been in a level 5 conflict for some years. So the most important thing at level 4 is to try to de-escalate it so it doesn't get into level 5, where we can enter a civil war, for example. And what I observed in 2019 in writing the book was that the country as a whole was at a high level 4, with some people, some individuals, some groups at a level 5, but the country as a whole was at a high level 4. I think that's pretty much continued over the last year. I don't think it's de-escalated, but I'm not sure that it's escalated either. We seem to be kind of stuck in this fight-flight model where groups have clearly pulled away from each other, stopped communicating, unfriend each other. That's a dangerous stance, because the less contact that we have with each other, the more we start to believe untruths about each other. But it hasn't, by and large, escalated to a violent level 5 conflict.
Mm-hmm. And Everett, you talk about language and the safe words that, you think you can walk in and everyone agrees with. Justice, that's a safe and a good word. But talk a little bit about how language has shifted, or has it shifted to reflect sort of where we're at this level 4 polarization.
Yeah, that's the first part of that chapter. And the goal there was to invite a mindfulness around language. I think folks often see language as sort of a neutral medium, as I quoted Escobar in the beginning of that chapter, that it's simply a tool for us to communicate what we're thinking. And but it's not. I mean, language is packed. In today's climate, it's very tribal. A lot of words are tribal markers. Thinking around immigration or environmental issues or justice, for example. And so it's important from a leadership perspective, but for all of us as well, that when we're using language, to really think about what words we're using, where those are coming from, and what they might mean or not mean. They may not have the neutrality that we think they do.
Yeah, at that level, Teresa, if you could speak to a little bit about what we're encountering, and not just our leaders, but like David said, our children, our grandchildren, that we're kind of all encountering this type of thing. What does that look like? Our response to language, or just kind of reaction to somebody sitting down at the table and saying something that offends us in our brain, our nervous system. How do we respond to that? I mean, is that something that we have some control over?
Well, we do, but I think it takes sort of that recognition, that recognition of the hurt or the confusion or whatever it is that gets activated in us. And so we respond to that in a similar way that we might have responded to danger. And that's just sometimes that's just what happens. It's our nervous system gets activated by something that feels dangerous. And then we might respond in ways that aren't kind, or that maybe even further escalate the conflict. And when I think about or talk to my own children about safety and danger, it's important that we remind ourselves that what makes us uncomfortable isn't necessarily unsafe. And so even just saying that to ourselves, like, this is an uncomfortable conversation, but I'm physically safe, helps us to sort of stay in the moment, stay in a non-anxious presence that I think Carolyn talked a lot about in her chapter. And that's a helpful way to attend to those we love and those that we're trying to sort out hard things with.
Yeah, I loved that. There was a statement in the book about, trying to find it now, the art of non-anxious presence. Mm-hmm. And that's a great thing to try to put into your being, to stay in conflict, to be uncomfortable, but to not take in that anxiety. Mm-hmm. That, I don't know if there are, and you sort of speak to those tools of how we can do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's saying first, sort of recognizing, noticing, like, if we can do that, this takes practice too, right? We can notice, oh, that thing that this person said really made my heart race. So even just that moment of awareness, my heart is racing. I notice that I'm uncomfortable, but I'm not in danger. So that first sort of recognition. And then breathing is really important, because usually when we're sort of confronted by difficult things or things that make us, feel nervous, we stop breathing. And so just taking a deep breath and, relaxing. So I think those are three different sorts of ways: naming, recognizing, breathing in that moment, before a response comes.
Yeah. David, how did we get here? You really write down like 10 different causes or contributors, but what do you think, looking at those, what are the main causes that got us here in the United States?
So the first thing is, most historians would agree that this is at least the fourth time that we've been in a polarized environment in the United States. And the first was around the American Revolution. Not all American colonists were patriots. Many were loyalists, loyal to the king, and there was great separation, division. About 80,000 of them fled the country during or after the Revolution. Obviously, the Civil War was the most significant time in the 1860s. And I think the 1960s was another time of significant polarization. I grew up during that decade, and I can remember the protests over the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement and the assassinations. It was a very fraught decade in many ways. So this is at least the fourth time, and we do identify 10 possible causes that have some research support in the book, but I'll just highlight the primary three. And the first is, the greater the gap between the rich and the poor in any country, the greater the degree of economic stratification, the greater the political polarization. There are lots of reasons for that, but one reason is that as people drop out of the middle class and start to fall behind, they become aggrieved, and they look for a reason to articulate that grievance. And if someone provides that, the problem is the immigrants, or the problem is China, or the problem is corporations, whatever that reason is, they will be attracted to it, and that tends to drive political polarization. But a second major cause is identity threat. When individuals feel that their identity is under threat, and that can be a very real sense of threat. For example, African-American men who have been at a higher risk of state violence than white men, for example. Or it can be a perceived threat. In the case of our country, those who are white Christians feeling, and I'm one of those, feeling that we may become a minority, and likely will in the next 20 to 30 years. So that if someone appeals to that sense of threat, there's a response of polarization. And the third really is articulated grievance. If somebody, and it's usually a political figure, can give a voice to the reason that you're falling behind, or the reason that your identity is threatened, that then results in increased polarization. Again, in any society, we see this happening around the world with populist leaders. So it's not just in the United States that we've seen this. Those are the three major causes. There's certainly others, including racism and sexism, but those seem to be the three major drivers of our current experience of polarization.
Mm-hmm. And when your identity threat, speaking of that piece of it, is identifying with a community, and that community is fracturing, how does that play out as far as your personal identity being threatened?
Yeah, one of the greatest tragedies from my perspective, because I consult with a lot of religious congregations, is that the polarization in the country has impacted religious communities at least as much as any other community. And so those faith communities that I think should be providing a bulwark against polarization have themselves been deeply impacted, and many are quite fractured and polarized. So just because we identify with a particular religious tradition, or because we share a particular ethnic identity, doesn't mean that any of us are immune from these broader forces of polarization. I think what's often needed is something that is larger than ourselves to identify with. For example, identifying as an American citizen in a healthy way, not a nationalistic way, but in a healthy way, can be a positive thing. For those who are in the Christian tradition, identifying as a follower of Jesus can be a healthy thing, something that unites people across the various racial, ethnic, gender boundaries that might be there.
Partisan, you said the articulated grievances. possibly getting beyond those articulated grievances into something that you have unity on. Everett, that gives us back to language. And you mentioned a lack of middle words, that we tend to have words that are at the spectrums and not necessarily to describe those in the middle. How did that happen? How could we skip over our middle, you know?
That's a question for a linguist, which I am not one of. But the purpose of thinking about that is in some ways it gives us some grace. We lean towards the ends of spectrums for a variety of reasons. One of it is we just have a hard time describing the middle. Nor does our media or other set us up for much success either. We're either asked if we're for something or against something, pro this amendment or against it. We just have a hard time with our language and with the way our society is set up to really explore that nuance and that middle ground. And simply recognizing that gives us a little grace and then invites some digging and exploring.
So we should lobby for having more than one answer on those types of things. Is that what you're saying?
Often folks do not stand on one end or the other. Our opinions are nuanced, even if our leaders would prefer they not be, or whoever it is in power. We struggle and we wrestle with how we feel. Things make us feel uncomfortable. We may not know why. Teresa was speaking to some of that. And it is my belief that in communication with others is where we start to see where things line up, where they don't line up, what they're based on. Sometimes they're based on an experience, sometimes they're based on a fear, sometimes they're based on something else. And that communication with each other is what helps explore that.
So it's interesting when a political poll is done, they always ask, do you support or not support candidate X? They never ask, to what degree do you support or not support, which would be a spectrum rather than a binary.
Right.
I'm thinking a chart or a color scheme, so we could at least get a little bit closer to what level of support we have, and not to the extremes. Your experience, David, working with the group and to resolve conflict, whether it be an issue, what do you see as been sort of the bedrock or best tools for leaders to utilize to try to get through this difference in people?
So the gentleman I mentioned earlier, Speed Lease, very experienced consultant, said that in his practice with hundreds of organizations, he identified two types of leadership that got leaders in deep trouble. And the first he called autocratic. It was when a leader said, it's my way or the highway. You're either for me or you're against me. You get on board or you get out of the way. Inevitably, that caused deep fractures within a system and people opposed the leader. But the second, which caused just as many failed leaders, was what he called undefined leadership. Leader would say, I don't really have an opinion. The only thing that matters is what the rest of you think. I'm just here to facilitate your process. That drove people absolutely nuts, and just as nuts as did the autocratic style. And the reason was they knew the leader had an opinion. They just believed that he or she refused to reveal it. And so they experienced that leader as manipulative. So in a time of polarization, what we don't want are leaders who disappear and have no thoughts about anything, because that's what's least needed, quite frankly, in a polarized environment. What we do want are leaders who are clear about who they are and what they believe, and equally invitational to others in the system to be clear about who they are and what they believe. So the leaders that I've seen be successful in highly polarized situations are never wallflowers that disappear, and they're never autocrats. Those two are consistently failed leaders. The ones who are successful are self-defined. They know who they are, they know what they believe, and they invite disagreement. They make it safe for people to disagree with them. That's what we need more of in this particular environment.
Right. Yeah, I think maybe we need to be sending this book off to quite a few of our our leaders that are out there. It doesn't seem that we're getting some of that leadership.
No, it's not a common style.
Teresa, you talk a lot, and I love your stories throughout the book on resilience, and how that is something to turn towards, or to look towards, as also a way to kind of work through where we're at. And I just wonder, how do we get to that source, and how do we, and is there a way we can build more resilience
Mhm.
in ourselves?
Definitely. Yes. Oh, David just said, remember who you are. And I think that's a place to begin, is to really remember your purpose, remember why you're here, in your work. And that can just bring clarity and groundedness, just in a moment of chaos and ambivalence, just saying that to yourself. Why am I here? What is my purpose? And then in the book, I share this story, not my story, it's been told many times, about the biosphere in Arizona, and how they tried to create the climates and forgot to account for wind, and so all the trees fell over, and we need some of this we need some conflict, maybe we need some difficult weather patterns to help us grow our strength internally. And certainly that helps us encounter life. So we remember that too. We remember, how did we get through hard things before? What helped me? What sustained me? So, and then there are a number of other things that I mentioned in that chapter. Just being self-aware, committing to self-growth, I think, even being vulnerable, which feels counterintuitive, but vulnerability, Brene Brown talks about vulnerability as the seed of creativity. And I love that, because to be creative, we have to take risks. And so when we can sort of lean into our own vulnerability, I think we can be very resilient. Even that process of naming naming what's wrong, what feels uncomfortable, that is a process of identifying vulnerability. So I think those are just some ways to cultivate that resilience that we innately have.
Yeah, growing up on the Mississippi River, when I was reading your chapter, I was immediately thinking of all of those communities who help. They flood and they build again. They flood and they build again.
Yeah.
And it's sort of our nature. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and they're very tied to place. That's, when we're tied to place and to our roots, that it's of course they're building again. That's home. Yeah.
It looks like we're having just a few connection issues. I saw Matt put a chat out to everybody. And so I hope folks are hanging in there, and hopefully putting in your questions. If you have some questions, put them into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get to those questions as soon as you put them in there. Looks like we may have had just one come in. In the meantime, Everett, you talk a lot about dialogue, and just the question I had was, when we can't get people to come to the table, I mean, you may be at a family dinner and your uncle is spouting off about something that's very offensive. And how do we get to dialogue after that? I mean, how do we get there?
Oh, there's the question. And the dinner table one comes up when I'm teaching speech too. Kids will say they're heading back for Thanksgiving. I've asked students, do you all feel like you know how to have difficult conversations? And the answer is consistently no. And so, part of the challenge, if we recognize that having that vulnerability is important, and having that transparency and being honest, the question is how. It comes up a lot. I was offering dialogue as one tool, and it's a rich practice. Although all of the book chapters author David have practiced it and facilitated it, and it's a opportunity to open up space to better understand each other. And I contrasted it with debate and a more ritualistic or reactive style of communication. And I think that's generally where people trend to. If you follow your local news and you hop into that Facebook comment feed after something is posted, it's bumper sticker style arguments. People are responding to debates in memes. It's very reductionist. It's reactive. Dialogue offers something different. And the only way dialogue really works is if everybody agrees at some goals and levels of respect from the onset. So your uncle at the dinner table may not want to participate in a dialogue. And there are times, as David noted in the beginning of the book, where dialogue does more damage than it does good. So everybody who's present needs to be in agreement on where they want to be, how they want to honor each other, how they want to honor the space, and listen. And so that's really essential. And what dialogue can do, especially in a family setting, is to help move those binaries or add that nuance and explore that space where it hasn't been explored. So in the book, I talk about in that chapter, thinking about the message, thinking about the messenger, and thinking about the audience. And dialogue especially, I think, speaks to that audience piece. A lot of the assumptions we hold about the other or the other side are based often more on sound bites from party leaders than they are on the beliefs or experiences of that person. So dialogue offers a chance to actually understand where that person's coming from, and in some cases help them understand where their own perspective and opinion is coming from. And both of those are really valuable.
Yeah, really valuable. We do have a question here from William. He said it was interesting that Everett, about not being able to talk about or be in the middle, it has become a weakness to be in the middle and not take a side. What can we do about this? How can we make people realize in society where football and baseball and other win-lose events are at the crux of our culture, that the middle can be a side that doesn't demand people demonize one group and support another? Maybe that's for all of y'all to answer.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to name that even in the most polarized groups I've worked with, there has always been a middle. I've come into several situations where people say, we're divided right down the middle, 50-50. And I do a survey and ask questions about the various issues that are at play. And I've never seen more than 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. It's just that the ends are much louder than those in the middle. So part of what we need to do is give the middle a voice. And part of what we need to do is to recognize that people on the ends are passionate for good reasons often, and to help them frame their arguments in ways that are productive rather than destructive. It's not that we're bad people when we take a side. I think often we need to take a side. It's how we take that side that matters.
I was thinking about a conflict recently, partnered with someone to work through, and what we discovered was that really people wanted a third option. People wanted a way out of this, this conflict that was really tearing apart a community. And so somebody, though, had to be brave enough in the community to stand up and say, there might be another way. And then once that happened, then other people wanted to do that. And so it just came from there. And I'm not saying that it's tight, it all, got tidied up, but it was a beginning of, okay, there is another way. As Everett said, deciding on ground rules about how we at least can just think about how to move forward, because going back didn't seem very productive, but it just felt like people wanted this other option desperately because they wanted to get along.
I wonder if some of that question too comes from, especially around issues of justice, that the middle can be seen as there's a word that I'm not going to be able to find that you all may be able to help me, like you're an accomplice, or that you're
a bystander, something.
Yeah, that silence is participating in this violence. You'll see that if you follow progressive circles, right? So sometimes that middle gets seen as you're okaying the issue, whatever it is, or the injustice. And I think in many cases that's a challenge for folks who are able to see that injustice to better invite those folks who aren't seeing it or having trouble understand it on all sides and all spectra there. So I wonder if that's part of where that question's coming from. I feel that as someone who sometimes trends in the middle, and feel that tension from each side. that I'm not seeing it, whatever it is.
Mhm.
Another question that's out here from Annie, in communicating at the fourth level of fight or flight, what type of words really don't communicate, and what words do we want to be aware of that immediately cause offense?
Yeah, so in level 4 conflict, what most often happens is people generalize and they personalize. So in levels 1, 2, and 3, people might be focused on the issues, but by the time it gets to level 4, they're entirely focused on the people, who the bad people are and how to get rid of them. And you hear lots of all or nothing language, either or. Either this person goes or I go. That's why we call it fight flight. And that kind of language, which is fairly common as conflict escalates, people start to generalize more and more, and you hear lots of you language. That's particularly unhelpful. So the degree that we can breathe, as Teresa was saying, and to the degree that we're able to listen to the other person's argument, and what I've trained myself to do, because it doesn't come naturally, is to paraphrase them when they finish and say something like, I want to make sure I understand you correctly. It sounds like you're really concerned about X, Y, and Z. Did I hear you right? And that usually helps the other party de-escalate. And then I will say something like, I would be delighted to share with you how I see those issues if you're open to it, and then to respond. And by that point, normally we can have a really good conversation, but that's level 4. At level 5, people are convinced that the other party is evil and has to be exterminated, at least verbally, if not physically. And so if someone is, invading the Capitol building on January 6th, that's level 5 conflict. That's not a negotiable situation. That's not something that we can sit down and can't we just dialogue about this? No, and at that moment we cannot. And that's why dialogue is not always appropriate.
Everett or Teresa, did you want to add to that?
Well said.
Well said, David.
There aren't magic words to avoid or not avoid it. It in many ways is about the orientation with which you're approaching the conversation, the goals of that conversation. I think why Teresa's perspective here is so important is that because we may be unaware, and maybe this is where the question's coming from, that some of our words might hold something that we don't realize. If you're in a dialogic space and the other person is with you on it, they can say, this made me feel this way, or I don't think you understand that word the way I understand it. And if you're in that dialogic space, there can be some movement forward through that. If you're not, it's reaction after reaction, and a conversation will deteriorate pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if you're really trying to listen, I'm thinking of one of my professors, Dr. McKee, who taught us about not being from around here. It's just like cultural humility. I don't know, and I really want to hear in those moments where it's a relational dynamic and you're wanting to maintain some harmony there.
Right. And that can be outside of, it could be this group. I really don't know. I don't understand. I want to hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
Another question from Mason. Monarchs trained their heirs for leadership. Early American industrialists did the same with their heirs. Who today in America is training young people for leadership?
Well, I'd like to believe that colleges and universities are doing that, however imperfectly. My own experience in being introduced to leadership came in college education, but also afterwards when I had several mentors that I really respected. And I wanted to be like them when I was in a leadership role. And then I had a couple bosses that, quite frankly, I didn't respect at all. And I realized I don't want to be like them in the least when I'm in a leadership role. And so that's a useful learning experience as well.
Yeah,
I'm under 30. Am I in the young crowd still?
And you're in a leadership role, Everett, so you could talk about that.
Everett, you're in the young crowd. Go ahead.
I'm in the young crowd. I've got a few precious years here before 30. I think I would point to my university education, certainly, and university education that that was community oriented and put me through experiences both internationally and here in town, connecting with mentors who are doing leadership with humility, leadership with compassion, leadership with a listening orientation, etc. And boy, I would echo David's too. I've also had folks that I've been frustrated by, and that's a helpful comparison as well. You can see how leadership impacts folks down the line, and having those two can be really helpful.
You all also write about a lot of organizations locally and even across the globe who have demonstrated different ways. Can you share with us like one of those organizations, either Harrisonburg or the other one the Tent of Nations?
Yeah, I have so much respect for the Tent of Nations, a Palestinian Christian family that is on the border between Palestine and Israel. And they have not been able to get running water or electricity. And they try very hard to hold on to their farm with lots of olive trees, even though it's been destroyed a couple of times. But they refuse to be enemies. They refuse to be enemies of Israelis. They refuse to be enemies of Palestinians. They welcome everyone from around the world. And they just have this incredible ability that I think comes primarily from their faith to offer us a space that is safe for Israelis as well as Palestinians, as well as internationals who come and are part of that community. And I know various groups from EMU have gone there in cross-culturals and really felt moved by the experience of being with people who are absolutely committed to loving their enemies and to not returning evil for evil. It's a remarkable witness.
There's a follow-up to that question from Martha about colleges and universities, and we sort of talked about it with this community, but they teach leadership. What about all those young people who don't go and can't go to college? Can we teach leadership at young ages, and how?
Yeah, I should probably say when I speak of colleges, I'm including community colleges and the wonderful technical education that they provide, as well as four-year colleges. But I also have met some young people, some of whom graduated from with my son from TA, Turner Ashby High School, who went straight into a trade and had excellent mentors who brought them into that trade. And they have become young leaders without a day of college education because they had good leader mentors. So absolutely, I see that happen. But I think those of us who are in a more advanced generation have a duty, whether we're parents or not parents, to mentor the next generation, to work with the next generation and share with them our mistakes as well as our successes, because others did that for us.
I think that there's some importance of a willingness to practice as well. Good communication is really difficult, and having hard conversations is difficult. And so I get the sense when I taught first year communication students at JMU and EMU that those who are born 2000 and after are just sort of withdrawing. They don't like what they're seeing. They don't like the leadership they're seeing. They don't like what they're seeing with their parents and family and et cetera on Facebook. So they either withdraw from that platform and they withdraw from political participation, is the sense I get. And that's scary for a democracy. That's scary for what we need right now, which is folks actually leaning in and young people leaning in, whether that's a protest down a street, but also leaning in terms of difficult conversations. And so that takes mentorship, that takes practice, and it takes mindfulness, willingness for vulnerability. And our community, I think, has a lot of great organizations who are doing a lot of that work. And I think when someone participates in a dialogue, especially one that's facilitated really well, it can feel very eye-opening. A lot of folks leave those feeling like, well, this can be done. You can have a conversation. That person is the person I point to for why the country is going badly. And I just sat across and I understood them better. So I applaud the work of folks at CJP, ICAD at JMU, who are doing that dialogue in our community and elsewhere.
A question coming up here from Stanley: isn't it really important to develop empathy?
Yeah.
Where is the person with the other opinion coming from? What makes a horse race is that not everyone has the same opinion. Maybe Teresa. Yeah, or
Oh,
David.
well, David, either way, I was just thinking about my son's second grade class where his teacher sat them in a circle and they were learning how to greet each other in the morning and just how to say, how are you? And to really look at each other and talk to each other. And that was such a building place for empathy building. I do think, I mean, empathy is foundational to being able to dialogue with one another. So David, I'm curious what you want to add.
I'm delighted to hear that teachers are working with empathy at those young ages. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So one thing we hear at level 4 conflict is how could any rational human being believe that? You know, people have just written off the other person because clearly if they were a thinking person like I am, they wouldn't believe that. And that's where empathy becomes particularly important. And a Quaker mediator 30 years ago taught me a great question, which I tend to use in mediation almost all the time and even in one-on-one conversations with people. And it is simply this: can you tell me what it was in your life experience that led you to take the position that you now hold? And it's so important, I'm going to repeat it. Can you tell me what it was in your life experience that led you to take the position that you now hold? And I've heard some amazing things in response to that that are often trauma related, which is why I really wanted colleagues to write about that. And I realized, okay, from my perception, they're stuck in an untenable position. But the reason they're stuck in an untenable position is very understandable. I think I would be stuck in exactly the same place if that had happened to me. And that allows me to have more empathy for what otherwise appears to be a completely irrational position. So it's helpful, I think, to remind ourselves that our life experiences are so different. And the reason people end up in different positions are almost always because of that life experience and the social groups that they were formed by.
Yeah, and I think unacknowledged pain, I mean, which is what you're saying. And so once we can acknowledge that also just grows empathy so much. We can be present to the pain. It's very hard. Yeah.
Can you give us that question one more time, David?
A third time. Can you tell me what it was in your life experience that led you to take the position that you now hold? And it's a very simple question, but it's disarming. I often see people's shoulders relax when I ask that question, or they'll just exhale. And sometimes they start crying, and then they give me the answer to the question. It's like, okay, now I understand. I didn't before, but now I understand why you believe what you believe. Now, let's still talk about that, but at least we can have some empathy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a different starting spot. Can you use that on Facebook? There was a question about, do you have any suggestions for navigating polarization on social media?
You know, the two principles I hold is that I will always treat another person with respect. Even if I don't respect their viewpoints, I will treat that individual with respect, and that I will always invite disagreement. So I don't withhold my own opinions. I feel quite comfortable expressing my opinions on my Facebook page, but I love it when people disagree with me and we can have some dialogue, as long as we can be respectful with each other. Colleagues?
I'm not on, well, I mean, just simply, I'm not on social media. It just feels like a platform where we can really forget. So remembering who we are is really important, and also remembering who the other person is really important. And it feels like a place where it's just so easy to forget that the person I'm talking to is actually another human being. So I would defer to Everett. Maybe you have more experience on social media.
Ooh, I feel like I've struggled. I
Yeah.
don't see my dialogic self shining brightly on social media. I think the platform in many ways sets us up to fail, and I don't think it quite sets us up for dialogue. You've got folks who can like your comment, and so you can get, amped up that you've got folks on your side. You're not getting those cues, your visual cues from people. You're getting snippets. It feels very competitive. So I've had conversations, would be generous, arguments on Facebook that I've ended with, I'm going to bring you lunch. because it's I can't, this isn't working. It's the platform is not providing what we need to understand each other. So I've pulled back a little bit. I don't think that at least not yet. And I think social media is wrestling with this of what their role is in terms of citizens communicating with each other on important issues. I'm not sure we've answered that question, and if we're even sure that social media is the platform. I can almost promise you that getting lunch together will help you find more common ground. Can you have some good debates on Facebook? Yeah, maybe. Not sure, but if dialogue is your goal, I'd encourage sharing lunch.
I like that. Different style of communication, get together. Another question here, when some view any compromise as capitulation to the other side, is there a way to foster compromise between polarized groups and maybe not make compromise a bad word?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, a level 4 conflict, which is where we are, compromise is seen as a dirty word. It's seen as a sellout by both ends of the spectrum. And so we almost have to find some alternative language. And instead, people are in this win-lose competition where each side is trying to dominate the other, as we've seen in Washington, D.C. for the last several decades, actually. So I think we have to instead think about this is a negotiation process in which each side is going to get some things and lose some things. That doesn't mean that we're compromising. That means that we are part of a larger whole in which we have to reach an agreement. And we're going to do our best to reach an agreement and to secure the things that are important to us, but we may not be able to win everything. But if a leader uses the word compromise in level 4 conflict, they are dismissed, just to be honest with you.
I'm thinking of what Pema Chodron said about being right. She said that when you think you're right, you're wrong. So I don't know, that's an interesting perspective to have when trying to navigate these conversations.
It becomes kind of an epic battle between right and wrong, and that's why compromise is considered to be a dirty word. And what we most need to do is de-escalate the conflict so people can again think about compromise, which they can at level 1, 2, and 3. But right now we're not in that environment.
Well, we're wrapping up a bit, but I just wanted to ask if you all have any final comments or sort of where you see hope for how we de-escalate, how we not take it to level 5. we saw some of that, you know, and I think the majority of us don't want to be at this stage. So where do you see hope for us?
I have to think about it for a minute. Well, let me say this. I feel very hopeful. I think hope, though, is, as one of my teachers said, is like a muscle. We have to practice hope. And we have to practice muscular hope. You know, that we're not waiting for hope. It's an active process. So we have to believe, I think, that things are possible, that there will be a way forward, and that we will find, as I said before, harmony together. I feel there's been a shift, and feels like there's been a shift as we find each other again, as we're able to meet again, as we're able to remember who we are, and that feels very hopeful.
So I'm finding my hope in the next generation, particularly millennials and Gen Zers, so those who are now 40 and under, because two things really strike me about these next two generations. And the first is they're not interested in cultural wars. They're not interested in polarizing fights. When I interact with them, they're actually kind of puzzled by it and wonder why those of us who are 50 and above are so intense about everything. So I'm hopeful about the next generation for that reason. And And secondly, it's a generation that was raised with diversity, that is used to diversity, that embraces diversity. And I'm talking about that in all levels, not just race and gender and sexual orientation, but also ideas. They're much more comfortable than I remember the baby boom generation being with diverse ideas. That makes me very hopeful, because they've learned how to live with that in a way that I think particularly those who are 65 and older have not. Everett?
Yeah. That's a hard one. I feel hopeful overall. I do. Um, I find hope in seeing dialogue happen and participating in it. And I think it will just be critical for us to have grace for ourselves.
Mhm.
It's messy. Democracy's messy. Families are messy. Um, and sometimes I think folks that maybe you're watching this and you feel like, all right, I'm going to lean into that conversation with Uncle such and such. It may not go great the first
Mhm.
time, and that's okay. You're like, either they may shut it down or it just might devolve. But I sense a willingness from people in this country, young people, and I think older folks too, that this isn't working and it's not gonna work, and everybody loses. It's just a lose-lose all around.
Mhm.
So we have to lean into dialogue. We have to lean into better understanding each other. We have to, and that means pulling out sometimes of media in some ways, or social media in other ways, and leading into building bridges and eating dinner.
I like that.
I
Eating
like
dinner.
it.
It might be time for that, I'm thinking too.
Mm.
For all of us. Well, again, I really want to thank everyone for being a part of this evening. Again, copies of the book. It is small. It's great for summer reading. It leads you into so many other paths because you quote so many other books. So it's a great starter for summer so that you can keep reading all summer on some of these other books. I really appreciate our sponsor again, the Gaines Group, not having our team at WMRA and our Pale Fire group who are present with us in spirit. And I appreciate you all joining us, writing this book and giving us some paths to move forward.
Thank you, MK. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.